Bohemian Rhapsody is iconic now, but in 1975, no one in the business wanted it. The heck, it was considered a disaster waiting to happen. A 6-minute operatic fever dream with no chorus? The song was everything a hit shouldn't be. Yet it ended up as a stadium anthem and karaoke beast that somehow became one of the biggest songs in rock history. So how did a song that broke every rule end up rewriting them all? This isn't just a story about a song. It's about risk, defiance, and 4 wild musicians led by one brilliant madman who bet everything on something nobody else believed in. These are the unbelievable events that took place behind the scenes of Bohemian Rhapsody. It's the summer of 1975. Queen has just finished their Sheer Heart Attack tour, and for the first time in their career, the band has full creative control. No label breathing down their necks, no one telling them what to write or what to cut. They could do whatever they wanted. And Freddie Mercury had something in mind. He didn't call it Bohemian Rhapsody at first. Back then, it was just a strange idea floating around in his notebooks under the name Real Life. A fragmented, ambitious, multi-part piece that didn't follow any structure anyone was used to. It wasn't rock. It wasn't ballad, it wasn't opera, it was all of them, jammed together in a way that sounded insane to everyone but him. Even his bandmates were confused. Brian May would later say, "It was all in Freddie's head before we ever recorded it." Now let's pause for a second. Think about this. Imagine your friend comes to you and says, "I've written a song, but it's actually 5 songs in one. It starts with a slow piano ballad, then goes full opera, then crashes into a hard rock guitar solo, and there's no chorus. Also, it ends with a gong." What would you say to that? That was the kind of thing Freddie was proposing. And somehow, instead of saying, "Are you out of your mind?" the band said, "All right, let's try it." That's where the madness begins. Freddie started building this piece from the inside out, part by part. The intro had these haunting, overlapping harmonies. The ballad section told a cryptic story about a boy who just killed a man. The opera section was full of nonsense syllables and bizarre references to Beelzebub and Galileo. And then the rock section was full-blown stadium thunder. There was no obvious hook, no chorus to sing along to, no catchy moment that radio could grab onto. It wasn't a song. It was a storm in disguise. But here's the thing. Freddie wasn't chasing a hit. He was chasing a sound, something he could hear in his head that no one else could fully grasp yet. And that's what makes this part of the story so gripping, because when you're the only one who believes in an idea, it either makes you a genius or a fool. There wasn't a guidebook for something like this, and there was no guarantee anyone would get it. Not the band, not the audience, nor the suits upstairs. But Freddie didn't care. He didn't want to make something safe. He wanted to make something unforgettable. I see a little silhouette of a man. Sometimes wish I'd never been. And what's really wild is, nobody told him to stop. Not yet, anyway. But that moment was coming fast. Because once the song was finished, the next challenge wasn't how to record it. It was how to convince the world to actually listen to it. Once Queen committed to Bohemian Rhapsody, they didn't just step into the studio, they walked into a labyrinth with no map. What they were trying to make wasn't a song in the usual sense. It was something bigger, stranger, riskier. And the deeper they went into it, the more it started to feel like they were building a machine from scratch, one with no blueprint, no safety net, and no off switch. They spent nearly 3 full weeks at Rockfield Studios in Wales, recording what would become the most technically ambitious single of their lives. Not days, weeks, just for this one track. And those weren't laid-back jam sessions either. These were long, obsessive hours spent layering sound after sound, part after part, line after line, until the whole thing started to take on a shape of its own. There were no digital shortcuts in 1975, no undo buttons. Every note had to be locked in by hand. And if you wanted to blend 180 vocal overdubs, which they did, you had to stack them one at a time, bouncing between machines using what they called ping-ponging. It was a brutal, painstaking process. You'd bounce one tape onto another, then bounce that one again, each time committing to choices you couldn't go back and fix. Every bounce added hiss and risk, so every decision had to be final. Today, if we don't like something in the mix, we just hit delete. Back then, once they printed it, it was there for good. And still, they kept going. Freddie, Brian, and Roger recorded all the vocal harmonies themselves, again and again, creating layers so dense it felt like a choir of 40 people instead of just 3. It was Queen's own version of the wall of sound, the same kind of layered madness Phil Spector had pioneered in the 60s, except Queen was doing it with themselves, not a studio orchestra. It was sonic architecture, built brick by brick, voice by voice. Producer Roy Thomas Baker once said, "It wasn't produced, it was constructed." And that's the best way to describe it. This wasn't just recording a song. It was like pouring concrete around a dream and hoping the shape it formed still made sense in daylight. There were moments where the whole thing felt like it might collapse under its own weight. Some days, they'd spend 12 hours just getting a single harmony to sit right in the mix. Other days, the opera section would sound too chaotic, or the guitars would overpower the vocals. But they never simplified it. They never gave in to the idea of trimming it down for convenience. And that's where the tension started creeping in, because while Queen was pouring their hearts and sweat into building this thing, the music industry was already sharpening its scissors. Back at the label, word was spreading. This track was turning into a monster. Too long, weird, and expensive, a 6-minute rock opera fever dream. Nobody was going to play that. Not on the radio, not on Top of the Pops, not anywhere. But Queen didn't care. Or maybe they cared too much. Either way, they kept pushing. And with every day that passed, every new vocal stack, every guitar overdub, they weren't just recording a song anymore. They were creating a standoff. The bigger Bohemian Rhapsody got, the harder it would be for the label to accept it. And the more they committed to the full version, the more dangerous it became to pull back. They were halfway across the bridge. It was too late to turn around. So they kept going, brick by brick, bounce by bounce, constructing a monster no one else could see yet, not even the people paying for it.
Easy come, easy go, will you let me go?
By the time Bohemian Rhapsody was finally finished, Queen knew they had something big on their hands. Not just in terms of length or sound or the hours they'd poured into it, but something that felt different, risky, and personal. To them, it wasn't just a single, it was a statement. But when they played it for the label, that's not what EMI heard. They heard a problem. The executives listened politely, some with their heads tilted, some glancing around the room like they were waiting for a punchline that never came. Then came the verdict. It's too long, too weird. There's no chorus. Cut it or kill it. The message couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't a radio song or a single. This was a 6-minute theatrical experiment that, in their eyes, had no business leading an album, especially not an album with Queen's commercial potential. A rock band this big couldn't afford to get artsy. That was for side projects and B-sides. What Queen needed, they said, was a hit, something clean, short, and what people could hum. The label wanted to go with You're My Best Friend instead, a lovely, straightforward pop tune written by bassist John Deacon. It was sweet, radio-friendly, and exactly the kind of thing they could push onto DJs without a second thought.
Ooh, you make me live.
Compared to Freddie's sprawling opera rock monster, it was the safer bet by a mile. But Freddie didn't write Bohemian Rhapsody to be safe. When the label suggested trimming it, maybe cut out the operatic middle or fade the song early, Freddie's response was clear, simple, and final. Either all of it goes out or none of it. There was no compromise or any version that would be carved up and watered down just to make it more palatable. To Freddie, cutting the song would be like ripping pages out of a novel. You'd lose the meaning, you'd break the flow, and basically destroy the whole point. Brian May would later say, "They told us nobody would play it." And at the time, he wasn't wrong to worry, because that kind of industry skepticism wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. The single you release sets the tone for your entire album. If it flops, the album flops. If it confuses radio, stations don't play it. If it alienates fans, you risk losing the very momentum you worked years to build. And Queen was standing on a razor's edge. A Night at the Opera, their 4th album, had cost a fortune to record. If Bohemian Rhapsody tanked, they'd be the band who took a giant leap and fell flat on their faces. That's the thing no one talks about. This wasn't just about art anymore. It was about survival. They were at that tricky point in a band's life where every move counts. Too much ambition, and you lose the crowd. Not enough ambition, and you fade into background noise. The safe play was obvious. The smart business move was clear. But Queen didn't care about playing it safe, not this time. They had put their hearts, their time, and their money into a song the world didn't know it needed yet. And they weren't going to let it die in a boardroom just because some executive couldn't hum along.
Bye, everybody.
But now the pressure was real. The band had gone all in. The label had doubts. And radio? Radio wasn't even returning their calls. So, what do you do when no one will give your music a shot? You go around them. If Bohemian Rhapsody was going to survive, it needed a lifeline fast. That's when Queen turned to an old friend, the legendary British radio DJ Kenny Everett. Known for his outrageous humor and complete disregard for rules, Kenny was exactly the kind of wild card this song needed. He wasn't just a DJ, he was a tastemaker, a voice people trusted to find the stuff no one else dared to play. So, Queen did something risky. They gave him a copy of Bohemian Rhapsody. Not officially, not with permission, not with a press release attached. Just a quiet handoff, a sneaky reel-to-reel tape, tucked into his hands with a wink and a grin. And what happens next would change everything. Kenny Everett got on air that weekend, with Queen's tape queued up, and a cheeky warning to his audience. "We're not supposed to play this," he said. "It's far too long. You won't like it." And then he played it. Not once, not twice, but 14 times. In 2 days. Why? Because people wouldn't stop calling. The phone lines lit up like a Christmas tree. Listeners were demanding to hear it again. "What was that opera rock thing? Who was that? Where can I buy it?" The curiosity spread like wildfire. Now here's the question nobody at EMI was prepared to answer. What do you do when the public wants something you already said was a mistake? Because suddenly, the very song they refused to release was all anyone wanted to talk about. Other radio DJs started calling, asking for a copy. Retailers started asking when the single was dropping. The label found itself backed into a corner by the fans themselves. EMI hadn't changed their mind. They hadn't suddenly got it. They didn't believe in the song any more than they did the week before. But now, they didn't have a choice. Releasing Bohemian Rhapsody wasn't a business move anymore. It had become more of a damage control. Queen had kicked down the door using their own radio. And what's wild is, they didn't even break any rules. They just bent them until something snapped. Because that's what great artists do when the gatekeepers say no. They find another way in. Now the track was out. The buzz was building. The public was listening. And here comes the next question. What happens when the world finally hears a song no one was ever supposed to hear? The moment Bohemian Rhapsody officially hit the airwaves, something strange began to happen. The very song that the label said was too long, too weird, and unplayable started climbing the charts like it had a mind of its own. And then, boom! Out of nowhere, it hit #1 in the UK. Not for 1 week, not even 2. For 9 straight weeks, it held the top spot, almost an entire school term. Christmas came and went, and Freddie's voice was still on every radio, in every record shop, coming out of every teenage bedroom window. The opera rock gamble had become a national obsession. Now here's the twist most people forget. The song didn't just hit once. In 1991, after Freddie Mercury's passing, Bohemian Rhapsody went back to #1 again. And just like that, it became the only song in UK history to hit the top spot twice in 2 different decades, by the same band.
Nothing really matters. Carry on, carry on.
So now the industry had a problem. A song they said had every reason to fail was now breaking records, becoming a phenomenon, and generating more money than anyone knew what to do with. It didn't follow the formula. It rewrote it completely. Because there was no chorus. There was no structure. It wasn't verse, chorus, verse. It was a 6-minute genre blender with references to Beelzebub, Galileo, and, supposedly, a subtle nod to the Quran, all wrapped inside what sounded like 3 songs duct taped together. How did something so strange become permanent in people's minds? Because Bohemian Rhapsody didn't just top charts, it got under people's skin. It became something bigger than a single. It became an experience. You couldn't listen to it casually, you had to go through it. And that made it stick. And then came the legacy. In 1992, the song got a second life in the most unexpected place, a movie about two goofy metalhead friends, Wayne's World. There's a scene where the characters headbang to Bohemian Rhapsody in a car. That moment introduced the song to an entirely new generation. Suddenly, kids who weren't even born when the song came out were memorizing every line. And from there, it never left. Today, Bohemian Rhapsody is everywhere. From karaoke bars to memes to movie trailers to talent shows. You can hear it at weddings, sports games, graduation parties, even funerals. It's not just a song anymore, it's a cultural landmark. And that's the part that really flips the script. Because Queen didn't change themselves to fit the music industry. They didn't shorten the track. They didn't chase trends or try to play it safe. Instead, they forced the industry to change around them. They raised the bar. And suddenly, every artist after them, from Bowie to Gaga to Kendrick, knew the boundaries could stretch a little wider. What Bohemian Rhapsody proved is that sometimes the best way to make a hit is to ignore every rule about how hits are made. The song was Freddie's way of pulling something out of his own head, something complicated, and make it real. To get the sound right, Freddie pushed the band into obsessive levels of recording, long nights, endless retakes, tensions rising, etc. Everyone knew what they were chasing, but no one was totally sure if they could catch it. The operatic section alone took a week. And then there was the industry pressure, the constant push to simplify, to make it radio-friendly, to shave off the weird edges. Freddie said no to all of it. But standing firm isn't free. You have to carry that weight and wear that resistance like a second skin. And the more he poured into the track, the more he risked losing if it failed. Which brings us to the big question. What happens when the world finally sees you, but only through the one thing you gave everything to? If that thing is no more, will you thrive on others or become invisible once again? You see, that's the paradox of it all. Bohemian Rhapsody gave Freddie everything he could have asked for: artistic freedom, global fame, immortality. But it also demanded something back. It demanded his energy, his perfectionism, his privacy, and his voice. The price of being seen that clearly is that you can't hide anymore. And maybe that's why the song still feels so alive. Because it isn't neat, it isn't tidy, it doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. Just like Freddie, it's loud, unpredictable, emotional, and all up in your face. So yes, Bohemian Rhapsody was a masterpiece. But more than that, it was a mirror. One that showed Freddie who he really was, and made the rest of the world see it too. By the time the dust settled, Bohemian Rhapsody wasn't just a hit, it had become a measuring stick. Not for sales or radio play, but for risk. It showed the world that sometimes the most lasting impact comes from doing the very thing you're told not to do.
Gotta leave you all behind.
Because, let's be honest, if Queen had played it safe, none of this would have happened. If they'd trimmed the opera section, shortened the runtime, added a chorus, or softened the lyrics, the song might have passed as a decent single. Maybe. But it wouldn't have been remembered. It wouldn't have changed anything. Instead, they did something few artists are ever brave enough to do. They bet the house on a 6-minute track that broke every rule in the book, and they won. And here's what's wild. Even decades later, nothing else sounds quite like it. Not one song, not even close. Many have tried to be theatrical. Many have played with genre. But Bohemian Rhapsody still stands alone. There's a quote that floats around music circles. It hasn't been imitated because it can't be. And that's exactly it. The song wasn't a template. It was a one-time leap, and you can't copy a leap. You can only make your own. The ripple effect is still being felt today. Artists like Elton John, David Bowie, Lady Gaga, Beyoncé, they've all talked about that song as a kind of benchmark. Not necessarily because they wanted to replicate it, but because it gave them permission to be bigger, weirder, and riskier. By every rule of music, Bohemian Rhapsody should have failed. It was too long, strange, and unpredictable. There was no chorus. The lyrics made no sense on paper. It broke radio formatting and basically defied logic. And yet, it worked. Not in spite of all that, but because of it. Because what Freddie Mercury was chasing wasn't a chart topper. He was chasing a sound, a vision, a feeling so wild and enormous that it barely fit inside 6 minutes of tape. He wasn't trying to play along, he was trying to speak a language no one had ever heard before, and somehow we all understood it anyway. And here's the real lesson Bohemian Rhapsody left behind. You don't move culture by following directions, you move it by rewriting the map. It was a reminder to musicians, creatives, even regular people chasing something of their own, that safe bets don't always build legends. Sometimes the thing that seems the least likely to work is the one that cracks the world open. And Queen didn't just think outside the box, they lit it on fire and sang over the ashes. What do you think about this great hit? Did it deserve ranking #1 on Billboard 100 for 9 consecutive weeks or not? Kindly share your thoughts and opinions with us in the comment. And if you found this video captivating, kindly give us a hand by clicking on like and subscribe.